How's everybody doing this morning? Everybody have a good Thanksgiving?
Yes.
Good. Well, I'm so glad that you're here with us this morning for worship. And we're glad to have those of you that are at home joining us for this time. Today is the first Sunday of Advent. And our theme this year is from generation to generation. And so there's going to be some weaving of talking about the generations that came before Jesus and the people that were a part of his birth story, as well as talking some about the generations of our church. And how our stories from one generation to the next get passed on and we become keepers of those stories. And those stories become woven with our stories. And together, one generation to the next, we help move things forward into the future. So I invite you this morning particularly to think about past generations. Past generations in Jesus' story, which later you'll get to hear the genealogy, and I encourage you to not just go to sleep. I know those sometimes can feel long, but to listen for names that sound familiar, whose stories you might know, and maybe to listen for some names you don't know that you want to learn about. And also to be mindful of our own story, of generations of this church. Some of you sitting in these pews are founding members. Others of us have come over the last 23 years. And so we begin kind of at the origins. So think some about those that are in the pews beside you who were here at the very beginning of our story. Hopefully as you came in, if you haven't gotten one of these in a previous week, you picked up a purple sheet about volunteering. If you have a moment in worship or after the service to fill this out, you can hand it in as you go out. And this helps us throughout the next year, lining up people as greeters and ushers and nursery volunteers and such. So we can definitely use your help. Please sign up where you're willing to serve. But now we're going to move into our time of worship and begin to think about one generation, the beginning, that opens the story for us.
So as you heard, the focus is on stories. That's such a big, broad focus. It's like our focus is love. How do you capture that briefly? You don't. So I just invite you to find where your story connects with each other, with all the stories around us, and to open up to the stories that you hear today and that are sparked in the memories that are stirred by today. Thanks for being here. We're glad you are here. Glad you've chosen to take your time to be here today. It blesses me, and I'm thankful for you. I love this Thanksgiving holiday. I love taking time to think of all the reasons I have to be thankful. And here's a whole group of you right in front of me. Thanks. This is from Isaiah, the 2nd chapter. The word that Isaiah, son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. In days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised above the hills. All the nations shall stream to it. Many peoples shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth instruction, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations, and shall arbitrate for many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. O house of Jacob, come. Let us walk in the light of the Lord.
Our fears and our dreams brought here to you in the light of this day. Gather us in the lost and forsaken. Gather us in our spirits in flame. Call to us now and we shall awaken. We shall arise at the sound of thy name. Young, forever a mystery. We are behold to him for your face. We have been sung throughout all of history, called to be like to the whole human race. Gather us in the rich and the hungry. Gather us in the proud and the strong. Give us a heart so meek and so lowly. Give us the courage to enter the song. Receive the life in the waters. Here we receive the bread of new birth. Here you shall call your sons and your daughters. Call us anew to be salt for the earth. Give us to drink the wine of compassion. Give us to eat the bread that is true. Nourish us well and teach us to fashion lives that are holy and hearts that are true. Touch us in buildings small and confining, mountains and heaven light years away. Here in this place the new light is shining. Now is the present and now is the day. Gather us in and hold us forever. Gather us in and make us your own. Gather us in, all peoples together. Fire of love in our national bone. Fire of love in our faith. And our bone.
You might need that, yeah. Over 100 people from the ages of 2 to 80 years old were asked the question, what gives you hope? From the voices of different generations, hear their answers.
My grandsons.
Dogs wagging their tails.
Talking with young people.
Kindness from strangers.
Spending time in the woods.
Waffles.
Hands clasped together in prayer.
Social progress.
The way my son calls everybody, buddy.
The ringing of church bells.
Babies trying over and over to take that first step.
The turning of seasons.
Christian community.
Books.
Friendship with my adult children.
Advocates for justice.
Seeing children singing and dancing in the pews.
The sunrise every single morning.
What gives you hope?
Today, we light the candle of hope to remind ourselves that God is at work in this world.
From generation to generation, God has brought good news of love and compassion, justice and community. Let us rest and abide in that good news. Amen.
And I feel it turning me. This I know for sure. That your love's like a flood, and your mercy never ending. I give my soul to you. There's a joy in my soul, and it rises like the morning. This I know for sure. That your grace is enough, and your promise never breaking. I give my soul to you. All of your goodness is like a well running over. My soul, it sings for you. For all your goodness, I will love you forever. All my songs I sing for you. Yes, all my songs I sing for you. The hope in my heart, burning bright in the darkness. Yes, I know for sure that I will look upon your face, forever dwell in your presence, and always sing to you. All of your goodness is like a well running over. Oh, my soul, it sings for you. For all of your goodness, I will love you forever. All my songs I sing for you. Yes, all my songs I sing for you. Let my life be to you a symphony, singing out holy, holy. All my days, every single breath I breathe, singing out holy, holy. All my life be to you a symphony, singing out holy, holy. All my days, every single breath I breathe, singing out holy. You are holy, for all your goodness is like a well running over. Oh, my soul, blood sings for you. For all your goodness, I will love you forever. All my songs I sing for you. For all your goodness is like a well running over. Oh,
Room, prayer by Reverend Sarah Speed. I asked God, what about my nail-biting habit, or the way I leave all the cabinets open in the kitchen? What about the way I can be dramatic, drumming up a fight, only to hand out apologies like souvenirs? What about the way I second-guess myself, let shame drive, or stay quiet when I have something to say? What about the way I chase accomplishments like a dog with a bone? What about the doubt or the fact that I'm terrible at prayer and cannot help but yawn during church? What about my baggage might be too big for the van, but then God called me by my first and middle name, which always means business, and said, who told you you were too much? Sugar, there is so much room for you here. So that's when I grabbed a seat and we hit the road, and I knew right then that the rumors were true. There is room. There is room. There is room.
Consider all grace. Try to prove our worth by keeping score. When we choose to let go of our fears, then we see the fun so much more. You're among us when we tell our favorite stories. You're among us in the laughter and the tears. You're among us when we learn to sing each other's songs. Then we see you've been among us all along. Help us hear your voice, Lord Jesus. Teach us how to trust the way you lead. Remind us again that you'll never be alone, that you'll always be right there to see us through. You're among us when we tell our favorite stories. You're among us in the laughter and the tears. You're among us when we learn to sing each other's songs. Then we see you've been among us all along. Show us once again how love, not be so afraid of being wrong. Help us to see even greater things than these when we circle around the fire we all belong. You're among us when we tell our favorite stories. You're among us in the laughter and the tears. You're among us when we learn to sing each other's songs. Then we see you've been among us all along. You're among us when we tell our favorite stories. You're among us in the laughter and the tears. You're among us when we learn to sing each other's songs. Then we see you've been among us all along. Yes, we see you've been among us all along.
Thanks, Trevor, for that song. Children's time. Kids Corner. Niños Mook. Hijas. Hauer. I don't know. So, like I said, this is a big topic. So I started writing down, what is stories? I got to find what I wrote, because I'll forget all of it, probably. Okay. Well, first of all, when you're not sure what to say, you ask the children, so what is a favorite story of yours? Do you have a favorite story? Picky and Gerald. Those are good books. Kai, do you have a favorite story?
Piggies in the mustard.
Piggies in the mustard. Cool. That sounds like one I have to check out. Is there anybody under the pews that has a story? Yeah? Okay. Somebody is finding stories under everybody's feet. Some stories stick to our shoes like chewing gum. What you do when you're not sure what to say is you probably talk too long. So here's where I go. This is some mansplaining now. You ready? Stories. The story is what makes birds and carpets and superheroes fly. The story is what makes prison walls crumble. Stories are what parents tell their children to scare monsters away, and what monsters tell each other when they hide under beds afraid of the wild children who bounce above them. Stories take us to faraway worlds, over rainbows, and where giants build castles on clouds, and where apes and little princes rule planets, and where mermaids sing, and where octopuses imitate chairs and elephants. Stories make heroes rescue the hopeless. They make beggars kings. They make losers winners. Stories turn strangers into friends. Stories can turn people into monsters and start wars. Better stories restore enemies, humanity, and end wars. Stories are possibilities, and the possibility of impossibilities. That seems awfully big, so maybe stories are like pockets. A pocket can be a separate compartment sewn into your clothes, even just another flap of material sewn over another. They might have flaps or buttons or zippers or Velcro or not. They might have pockets of their own. Pockets with pockets inside pockets are called backpacks or purses and wallets or furniture. People-sized pockets are sleeping bags. Edible pockets are sandwiches. Pockets for pickpockets are a source of income. Pockets are where you stash things, keep and save things, forget and lose things, and then find things. Even find that they're the wrong pockets or in the wrong pair of pants. Where you can put your hands to keep them warm or out of the way when you feel awkward, or hide if they're dirty. Sometimes you might wish you had more to stash, more clues you find when you're out exploring. Or wish you had fewer when you're searching through them to make sure they're empty when you do your laundry. Sometimes they're bulky and clumsy looking. And sometimes they're too short. Sometimes they have holes in them, and sometimes they're fake, pretend to appear slimming. Some pockets let you know that maybe you're a pool table or a kangaroo. Maybe even a drawer or a vase or a hollow tree or a cave, even a grave. But stories are more than pockets. Stories help us discover the world inside ourselves and connect to the world inside others. Stories teach us there are always other stories, more stories, and they don't always fit together neatly. But they can and do fold together somehow. So let's pray a little bit. Can we do that? We can just hold our hands out if you don't want to touch, because we're staying clear. Thanks for the stories these young'uns are born into, the stories that they're living, and the stories that they will reveal to us and teach us about themselves and about ourselves. And thanks, Jesus, for letting us be part of your story and for being part of ours. Amen. Amen. Thanks for coming up.
Would the folks that are going to receive the offering come forward, please? Make sure the baskets are large. Pray with me. Lord Jesus, all too often we take for granted your many gifts of bonfires and stories, of long walks and daily rituals, of food and friendships, of music and worship, of community and belonging, of the miracle of life itself. The Thanksgiving reminds us again how the practice of gratitude can open our eyes and our hearts and our hands so we may fearlessly share our gifts, so we can extravagantly share our lives for the sake of your kingdom, your holy community. Bless these gifts, Lord, with your mercy, with your grace, with your love. In your name we pray. Amen. Don't you tell me a story so I won't forget. You can add a little humor or even some regret. Oh, I can't remember names very well. They just don't seem to register with me. So let's trade a story or even try a song. Then we'll remember, start a history, get along. Yeah, let's all tell each other stories, maybe even sing a song or two. Let the pictures with their magic, ever changing, never new. Lift us up, make us whole, bring us through. So listen to my story, it means a lot to me. When we hear each other's story, it invites us to see who we really are behind our masks. Hidden in the corners of our hearts, for compassion will convey so much more than we can say. While all our sorrows lose their power, fade to gray. Yeah, let's all tell each other stories, maybe even sing a song or two. Let the pictures with their magic, ever-changing, never through. Lift us up, make us whole, bring us through. Our stories are the way we live our lives. They show us who we really are, the wherefores and the whys. They can bring us together so we can always share. They invite us to relate, reciprocate and care. So let's all tell each other stories, maybe even sing a song or two. Let the pictures with their magic, ever-changing, ever true. Lift us up, make us whole, bring us through.
Thanks, Trevor. And now, from Matthew chapter 1, an account of the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham.
Abraham was the father of Isaac.
You're not turned on.
Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar, and Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Aram, and Aram the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon the father of Salmon, and Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David.
And David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah. And Solomon the father of Rehoboam, never mind. And Rehoboam the father of Abijah. And Abijah the father of Asaph. And Asaph the father of Jehoshaphat. And Jehoshaphat the father of Joram. And Joram the father of Uzziah. And Uzziah the father of Jotham. And Jotham the father of Ahaz. And Ahaz the father of Hezekiah. And Hezekiah the father of Manasseh. And Manasseh the father of Amos. And Amos the father of Josiah. And Josiah the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the deportation to Babylon.
And after the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Salathiel, and Salathiel the father of Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel the father of Abiud, and Abud the father of Eliakim, and Eliakim the father of Azor, and Azor the father of Zadok, and Zadok the father of Achim, and Achim the father of Eliud, and Eliud the father of Eleazar, and Eleazar the father of Matan, and Matan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, who bore Jesus, who was called the Messiah.
So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. And from David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations. And from the deportation to Babylon to the Messiah, 14 generations.
Aren't y'all really glad that you're not in the band that didn't have to read all those names? They did pretty good, right? They did pretty good. So my sister, Angela, who a lot of you have met in Colorado, she lives in my dad's childhood home. He was somewhere around 9, 10, 11 in there, around Finn's age, when they finished construction on the home that my grandfather had designed, and they moved in. My paternal grandmother, and my father passed away just a year apart. And in that last year of my dad's life, my sister bought the childhood home. And she moved in, and he helped her make some updates on the house. But even with these updates, there are parts of the house that have not changed. And when you walk in, it feels just like you are in my grandparents' home. She still has my grandmother's oven, which is from like the 50s. And you are allowed to now open the oven and pull the tray out with an oven mitt. But we do so laughing because my grandmother was very small, and it was hard for her to lean across the stove. She wasn't even 5 feet tall, or over the oven door. And so my grandfather built her this little tool, this wooden tool that she would use to grab the tray and pull it out. And so we were required to use that tool as well. And it sits in the drawer next to the stove. When you move into the living room, there's this place where the wall protrudes, and you would expect to find a fireplace, but there is not. Although there is a fake fireplace in the basement. I don't know why. But in the living room, where you think there's going to be a fireplace, there is paneling up half the wall, and there's a thin, narrow door that you can open. I don't know what my sister stores in there now, but I can't look at that little cabinet without remembering that my grandmother would send us there to open it up and pull out those old metal kind of rickety dinner trays, and they'd have designs on the tray. Do you remember those? And that's where the kids would eat, if there was family over and we didn't have all the extra tables out. And then you go down into the basement where the fake fireplace is, and there are all these wooden cabinets on one wall. It's a little disturbing when I was back there because I got curious and I opened them. And of course it was all of my sister's storage stuff. But when I was a kid, it was full of toys like this. Because my grandfather built toys for a living. For about 40 years, he was the only toy designer for Nyland. And we would go down there and look at all his different designs. There were ones that were set aside for us to play with, but there were other ones that we didn't touch. And after all the family had passed, we each got one. This one I found in Eureka Springs in October at an antique shop. And I remember very clearly playing with a replica of this one. And so I might have spent a bit too much money to bring it back home to the family. And Asher is very happy playing with it. There's a long hallway on the first floor that leads to the bedrooms. And my sister has all these photographs framed, almost all in black and white, of our family line back to those who lived in Sweden and never even immigrated to the States. And she is the keeper of these pictures. She's the keeper of a lot of their names, too, because we get kind of confused with the Carl Carlsons and the Per Persons in our family line. But she remembers their names, and we hold a lot of their stories. And I remember that every time I walk in, because right as you go through the doorway into the hallway, one of the first pictures you see is of my great-grandmother, Adina, who looks exactly like my sister. It looks like my sister has put on old-timey clothes and taken one of those photographs. These stories, their stories from generations ago, have propelled our family forward to where we are today. If my relatives had not immigrated to the United States and gotten off the train in Rockford, Illinois, it's unlikely that my grandfather would have become the toy designer for Nylon Trucks for 40 years. This is part of my story. Now, our Advent theme this year is from generation to generation. And just as my family's stories have shaped the future for later generations, the same can be said of Jesus' story and for each of us. Now, the lectionary texts in Advent often confuse us because they like to jump around to different times. But this year, we're actually going to move chronologically through the story. And we're going to consider the people that take part in shaping the path that leads to Jesus' birth. So we begin with Jesus' genealogy. Now, I know that reading those can get pretty boring. And there's a lot of hard names. And we want to just skip over them usually. But I want to encourage us to consider them this Advent season because no person stands alone in history. We all have the generations that have come before us and those that will come after us. And our stories propel from one into the next. Diana Butler Bass puts it this way. She says, the begats are not boring at all. Now you got to hear, Joseph was the father of, or Abraham was the father of, so-and-so. But if you go to some other translations, do you remember how it's phrased? It has all those begats that she's talking about. Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac begat Jacob. So the begats are not boring at all, she says. They tell stories of belonging, of our sacred location in God. In knowing our roots, we come to know ourselves. Now, we could spend a lot of time reflecting on the stories of the different people in Jesus' genealogy. I mean, there are some names in there that you can't even find in other parts of the Bible. But here's a few that probably stood out. Abraham, right? Known for his faith to God, and the one to whom God makes this initial promise to multiply his family. We know of Jacob the trickster, right? Who steals his brother's birthright but later reconciles with him. But then we get to some interesting people that might surprise you, like Tamar. And there's a few Tamars in the Bible. This Tamar is one who has been widowed. And she tricks her father-in-law to sleeping with her so that she will have a child. She has twins in the end. And she secures her place in the family line. So in Jesus' genealogy, not only do we have a woman named, but we have a woman who does some questionable things, but in the name of survival. In a world that does not give women a proper place. And then we have Rahab. Rahab, who you might remember hides the spies in her home, Israelite spies, before they bring about the fall of Jericho. And then it said that Rahab and her family are the only ones to survive from the battle. But what you might not have known is that Rahab goes on to get married and she becomes the mother to Boaz. Boaz, who is the same guy that Ruth marries to secure a life for her and her former mother-in-law, Naomi. Their stories are all tied together. And the line goes on, and it weaves in these familiar and unfamiliar names. Each person with their own story, each person having been a part of propelling life into the future and shaping the path for what would come. But perhaps what startles us most about this genealogy is that when we come to the end, it does not say Mary begat Jesus. I mean, it does say Mary's name is mentioned. But the genealogical line is that Joseph begat Jesus. The family line traced back through the centuries that Matthew feels is important to share with the community is not Mary's line through which Jesus' blood directly flows, but Joseph's. The man that Jesus shares no DNA or blood with. What does that mean? What are we supposed to take from that? For this gospel writer, the family is more than the bloodline. The stories of the generations that led to Joseph matter. Surely they helped shape who he was. Whether they acted with integrity and for God's liberating love, or they acted against it, those individuals in Joseph's line are part of his story, and they are ultimately a part of Jesus' story. Their choices, their actions, their beliefs, their stories move the greater story forward, weaving one generation into the next. Dr. Christine Hong is the professor of practical theology at Columbia Theological Seminary. And she suggests the phrase, genealogies of the intangible. Genealogies of the intangible. For family lines such as Jesus' line through Joseph. These genealogies are made up of people and the stories we learn in community, not necessarily our bloodline or family tree. She writes, we build and bless by remembering that we are not alone. Remember those who struggled and thrived before we took our first breath. Our great cloud of witnesses, they co-conspire with us. This great cloud continues to witness to us about liberation and freedom. Maybe this week go back and read that first chapter of Matthew. Do a little reading, even a little Googling if you want, and discover some of these names that you don't know much about. People that are part of Jesus' genealogical line. And ask yourself, how did they help move the story forward? Or what can we learn from them? And we can do the same for ourselves. As we consider Jesus' story from one generation to the next, I want us to reflect on our own church's stories. Stories that have been created and shared. Who are the people in our church's genealogy? Who are the people that are a part of our origin story? Some of them are sitting right here. If you're part of the origin story, raise your hand. Look around if you're not raising your hand. Okay? Some are sitting very close to you in the pew. There are others who have moved on from this place. But we are still keepers of their stories and their contributions. Those of us that have come since our church's birth 23 years ago, we inherit those stories. We inherit the stories of struggle and of thriving, of growth, of wisdom, and more. Those of you that were here first, you planted seeds of hope when you created this faith community. And those of us that have come since then are proof of those seeds flourishing. And all of our stories become woven together from one generation to the next. And those of us here today continue to be keepers of the stories that we will pass on to the next generations of our church. The cosmic prophecies of Isaiah will visit us a lot throughout Advent. And this passage that you heard at the beginning of worship is one of my favorite Isaiah ones in Advent, because what a beautiful image to see weapons of violence and destruction melted down into plowshares and pruning hooks. Isaiah talks of the future and says, "They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks." And we see this prophecy come true in Jesus' life. A king who would not rule with sword or violence, but with love and healing. While kings of history were adorned with swords and spears and armor and so much more to symbolize their power, their ability to conquer and rule, Jesus was more of the gardening type. He planted seeds everywhere. He unearthed the truth. And he pruned what was evil so that good could bear fruit. I think the prophecy, we need to remember, reaches beyond just surrendering those weapons and turning them into gardening tools. It's putting those gardening tools to use to help nurture that world that bears fruit in its actions. And so I wonder, as we start off this Advent season, what stories of our church need unearthing? What stories need sharing so that we can learn from them? In these stories that we are passing down, that have already been passed down by some who have moved on, what wisdom can we glean from them? Or where might we see a path that we need to diverge from to find a better way? This is my challenge for us as we begin the Advent season, to unearth some of these origin stories and to learn from them. Now, I know it is a busy season, and your calendar is already filling up. But the season of Advent is about preparation, about waiting, and it's not just about the preparation of presents under the tree, right? It's about the preparation of our heart. So if you came after our founding 23 years ago, I want to challenge you to be intentional and spend 20 or 30 minutes with a founding member and ask them what they remember about the beginning of our faith community. They will have stories to share, and different members will have different stories and different perspectives. As you look to Jesus' genealogical line and consider how those in the generations before him moved things forward, gather stories and learn how our founders helped propel the story so that you would find sanctuary here today. And if you are a founder, sit down with a newer member. Sit down with someone that's been here 10, 12 years. Because I expect you have stories to entrust to them. Share with them, not with the expectation that they will always lead or guide as you have, but that they will carry your story with integrity and they will let it inform them as they help the church decide our next turns and twists in our path. Dr. Christine Hoy offers one other concept she calls usness as the framework for all our lives. Usness, U-S-N-E-S-S. We share this journey from one generation to the next. Our stories and the landscape of our faith ties us to one another. In every church I've been in, folks say, we want our church to be more intergenerational. Everywhere I've been. As if we can produce all these activities that will magically make 80-year-olds and 30-year-olds and 10-year-olds want to hang out. No minister can magically make that happen. It requires the different generations of the church intentionally sharing their stories with one another, weaving the tales of their lives together. It requires the older generation to take up the responsibility of passing their stories on, and of the younger generations to recognize that they are inheritors of this history. So an opportunity is before us to embrace our usness, to recognize that we too have a genealogy here in our church, a genealogy of the intangible, much like Jesus had through Joseph. So find someone to spend a little time with this month. Maybe find more than one. Come 30 minutes before church starts and plan to meet someone downstairs over a cup of coffee and ask them about the beginning of this church. Or find someone who has come later and share that cup of coffee and entrust your stories to them. We have an opportunity before us. So will you embrace it and not only make room for everyone's story, but be the keeper of each other's stories? Amen.
For our final song, if you can, if you'd like to, if you're able. Talk among yourselves. March in place.
upon the Lord. Strength will rise as we wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord. Our God, you reign forever. Our hope, our strong deliverer. You are the everlasting God, the everlasting God. You do not faint, you won't grow weary. You're the defender of the weak. You comfort those in need. You lift us up on wings like eagles. Strength will rise as we wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord. Our God, you reign forever. Our hope, our strong deliverer. You are the everlasting God, the everlasting God. You do not hurt, you won't grow weary. You're the defender of the weak. You comfort those in need. You lift us up on wings like eagles. You're the everlasting God, the everlasting God. You do not faint, you won't grow weary. You're the defender of the weak. You comfort those in need. You lift us up on wings like eagles.
I don't know if you could all tell, but they went on without you. They were singing "Strength Will Rise" before you all ever got there. They don't wait for you anymore. Couple of quick reminders for Advent. If you haven't gotten your Advent devotional or your Advent calendar, you can do that out in the lobby. The devotional is also available online. We sent that out in the weekly newsletter. It'll be out again this week. Next Sunday, we have a special treat for you. It is still Advent. It is the second Sunday of Advent, but it is also a Celtic Advent Sunday. So, guest musicians Dave and Kathy Agee will be with us. They were not able to be here when we had our Celtic Sunday because they got sick with COVID, if I recall correctly. So they are going to come and help us with a Celtic Advent Sunday service. Also, there will be a little debut of a violin duet by Abby Pratt and her latest student, Finn Smith. Oh, yeah. So that will be fun, too. So come for Celtic Sunday next week. Come early, have coffee with someone, learn their stories, right? Our Advent offering this year, there are two ways to be a part of it. One is to give financially. You can do so online or through a check. If you do it with check or cash, you'll make sure you put that it's the Advent offering. If you do it online, you can pick the Advent offering. The offering this year goes to the Dialogue Institute. We have partnered with them for years, and recently they experienced some pretty severe vandalism of their building. And we've had such a good relationship with them, and they are trying to raise $50,000 to make repairs to the building. So all of our offering financially for Advent specifically will go towards them. Also, the other offering is food. So there is a bin out in the lobby area there. You can bring in food to donate for Covenant Presbyterian, our sister church, and support their food pantry. Our folks that work with food pantries will tell you that they are low on food in a lot of ways. Thankfully, many of them get government assistance. Some of them that are smaller won't have as much assistance. Oh, Holly had a comment.
I'm not on.
There you are.
Just real quick, canned proteins.
Canned proteins.
It's very, very difficult right now to get proteins into pantries.
Great, canned proteins. So things like tuna fish, things like that are really great. Beans, The other thing I always tell people to be mindful of when you're donating food is to look at what the ingredients require. If it requires milk, they may not have milk. If it's hamburger helper and requires meat, they may not have meat. So try to think about some of those things when you're choosing things to bring in, okay? So those are two ways that you can help with our Advent offering this year.
It's also helpful if you can find stuff with pull top or pop top.
Yes. Pull top if you can on cans, because not everybody has a can opener, right? So those are our Advent offerings. Look in your newsletter for things that are going on. On Sunday mornings, we have Visio Divina with the art from this series back in the community room at 9:15. We have an all-church Christmas party here in the fellowship hall coming in December, as well as a Blue Christmas for those who are grieving this season. So there's lots of ways to connect. I hope you will find ways to be a part of our community. I'm going to invite you to stand for our closing benediction if you are able. This is our Advent benediction through the entire series. And each week, you're going to experience it in different ways with different voices. Okay? But this week, I'll just offer it for you. As you leave this place, may you go knowing that from generation to generation, we have been claimed and loved. From generation to generation, God has been by our side. From generation to generation, we are not alone. The God of yesterday and the God of tomorrow knows you by name, loves you, and calls you forth, saying, "Go be the person you are called to be. Love wildly. Do justice, and come back soon." May it be so. Amen.